Hello and welcome to this Total Education Centre, Total Education Media Production. And tonight we're talking about questions. And they're questions about Frankenstein that readers and viewers on the website have asked about, students. And so we're hoping that these questions will solve some of the problems that you have with the novel Frankenstein. Our first question tonight is, what is the main theme? Now, in our area of study in particular, most of the ideas or themes that you consider important come from the idea of the creator and the creation. And that's a thematic concept that goes back to the very heart of the novel and what does it mean to be human and the values that the novel creates. You know, if you look at the lecture notes that are available on the website, you'll find that there's lots of pages on values and what the values are. So I won't go into that here, but let's have a look quickly at some of those themes that come from that idea of creator and creation. The first one is, of course, abandonment and rejection. And there's thorough notes again, as I said on the website, of all these, but if you think back to the abandonment, the abandonment by the creator of the creation is a key thematic concern that runs through that, and it goes back to that main idea. Revenge and retribution is another theme that goes back to that main idea of creator and creation, as is monstrosity and miscreation, as is nature in many ways, and, or should I say, misuse of nature. Now those are the sort of thematic concerns that most people talk about and the critics write about, and we have discussed in our work on Frankenstein. So if you think back, probably the main theme, the main concept that you're looking at is the idea of creator and creation and everything that stems from that, especially the values that are produced in that way. So that was an excellent question. Let's look at our second question, which is, why was the creation of the monster short and underdone? Like, suspense is built and then it feels like you missed it. And that's a very valid point that many readers have raised, and certainly critics have raised it over time, and I'd like to address that in some detail here tonight. The creation of the monster or demon, or creation as you want to call it, is truncated in many ways in the novel, and lots of people commented on the very short space. And you know, there's probably a 10 to 12 page sequence where Frankenstein begins at university, and then all of a sudden he's got this creation that is born, and it's not very scientific and it's not very detailed, and critics have probably over the years, as things have become more modernised, I suppose, have commented on why this is and the problems with that, and as this reader has suggested, why is it so short? Why is the suspense gone? And I don't think that's the point of the novel, and I think that's why Shelley particularly makes that very brief. I think she suspends reality in creating the monster for a start, and any drawn out period of trying to explain that creation would not be sensible and certainly wouldn't be believable, and we already have to take a giant leap of faith really when we read the text. And so the other issue that comes from that is the idea of Shelley's knowledge and knowledge in science at the time. Now, Shelley tries to go into great detail about how Frankenstein actually creates his monster from body parts. Not only would she A, not know how to do it, but B, the scientific processes for that in those days weren't there, and it couldn't really be explained anyway. So it's not as relevant or important to her as what comes next. And I think that the sense of creation is given over to the amount of space that she thinks is significant. It's not the main purpose of this Promethean myth, as she calls it, and the didactic nature of the text. I mean, it's meant to teach us a lesson about trying to replace God and the role of the creator and his usurping of nature and all those sorts of things. And I think really that's what Shelley's trying to get across. And I think that the little bit of suspense and horror that is created in that section where the monster is being sort of born in that laboratory, that's extremely Gothic. And you read the very few pages around its creation and leading up to it about how he gets the body parts and all that sort of stuff. It's extremely Gothic, and I think that's where the horror comes from, and it's important not to delve too deeply into that. And I don't think she does, and I think she does enough to give us that sense of horror and that sense of suspense, and certainly the excitement that Frankenstein has of that creation. But in particular, she doesn't build on that too much. As I've said, the text is more about consequences than actions, and I think the action is very short and abbreviated, but the consequences certainly are long and far-ranging, and certainly deadly for many of the participants. The next question that we have is the comparison between Walton and Frankenstein important? Now, some critics probably have talked about that there's really not much comparison between Walton and Frankenstein, and other critics say, yeah, well, Walton is a young Frankenstein as such, if you can call him that. They certainly have something in common, and certainly the things that they do have in common are important to both characters, but certainly Walton is a little bit different, and we see that in the end. Certainly both have large egos, and there's no doubt about that. Both characters certainly want to be immortal in many ways, in that Frankenstein wants to be a creator of things, a creator of people, whereas Walton's a little bit, I suppose, less gigantic in his approach to it, and he wants to be remembered for great discoveries, as being a wonderful explorer, and is prepared to pretty much do anything about that. And this also links them to the idea of obsession, and they are very much linked together with their concept of obsession. And we see them both at the end trapped in the ice. And this scene is certainly very Gothic in its way, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, because a different question comes up about that. But I think both in many ways begin with romantic ideals, and you know, some critics would argue that Frankenstein never has a really clear motive, but initially I think his sense of wanting to create comes from a natural desire and curiosity, and then becomes obscured a little bit later on with obsession. I think Walton also has that sense of curiosity, and I think they both become overcome with that need for recognition more than anything. And so his sense of that, what stems from that romantic ideal, how it becomes twisted into an obsession, is the thing that carries them together, and focuses both them, and you can sort of compare them on those levels. I think what separates them is at the end, though, Walton in particular, Frankenstein never learns, and we talk about that in the notes that are available on the website, but Frankenstein doesn't really learn from his experiences. Certainly, yes, he suffers, but he never really learns. And we talked about that in the other video, so I won't go into detail here. But Walton does learn. Walton is able to certainly adapt and change, and we learn this when he turns the boat around at the end and doesn't continue with his journey that now seems to be quite inconsequential compared to events that have gone on. So I think that's a good question, and it raises that. But is it useful to our study? Well, it certainly goes to show in many ways, going back to the idea of creator and creation, that Frankenstein is a very different character who carries his obsession too far, whereas Walton he has a different sort of obsession. He's able to hang back and doesn't try and play that role of God and usurp that role. And I think that's where they're very different, and I'm not sure whether what comes in there, although we can talk about certainly the values that Walton portrays at the end as being somewhat didactic in the Shelley sense that we've learnt something and the reader could learn something from his ability to change and adapt at the end. Another question, and a very clear one here, is, are Frankenstein's flaws subject to questioning what it means to be human by comparing his human physicality and his sort of rotten character to the creation's inhumane appearance but relatively decent character? And that's an excellent question. I think that goes to the heart of the Promethean myth, and certainly the core of the values of the text and what it does mean to be human. Now, I think it's important that we remember that while the creation has many, many good points, and we certainly do empathise and sympathise with it, it is a horrific physical figure. And we can't stress that too much. And if we go back to the themes that are in your notes about the monstrosity and the concept of monstrosity, and where certainly the physical appearance of the monster is off-putting to everybody who meets him, and in fact no one in the novel is able to look at the monster and not be afraid and not be terrified. And that's an extremely important point. However, the monster does have many, many good qualities, and we empathise with him significantly, although it also must be remembered in direct contrast to that the monster certainly does commit murder and has many, many issues and problems stemming from that monstrosity. And the question here is, what does it mean to be human? And we sort of answer that in another video, but I'll touch upon it here. And I think that we need to think about what values Shelley is trying to get across in the novel. And I think the monster shows that his ability to learn, his ability to adapt, his ability to emote with others, and his hunger for belonging are all very important values that Shelley sees are certainly human qualities and human characteristics that she values, and they're the values that Frankenstein doesn't really have. And his isolation and obsession are certainly mirrored with the monster, yet the monster wants to make contact and Frankenstein doesn't. And I think that's a question that bears a lot of thought, and certainly in the ideas and the themes and the other video on the characteristics that we talked about of the creation, you'll get your answers more specifically to that question there, but that gives you a general overview of what to look at and how to look at that question. One final question really is a sort of two-part question in many ways, and it begins by saying, in the ending, even though creation has made his revenge, we get a true sense of revenge. We don't get a true sense of revenge, only further sadness and lost hope. Is this to evoke more feelings toward the creation, or is it to link with the Gothic genre? My answer to that part of this long question, and very good question, is the Gothic conclusion is there, yes. I mean, look at the setting in the Arctic, the isolation, the trapped, the sense of lost hope, that they may never leave, they may not escape. And Frankenstein goes past, gets picked up by Wharton, they're both trapped, they're both seemingly at the end of their time in many ways. And that allows for that retelling of the story. So certainly there is a Gothic sense in there, but the sense of loss of hope at the end is more about, I feel, more about the creation. And while Frankenstein hasn't learnt much and is willing to go on right to the end to get revenge, the monster has gained our empathy right through the text, and I think it adds to that. That isolation only adds to its sense of misery and sense of loss of hope, and certainly as our writer of the question and viewer of this website says, that we get a true sense of revenge. We don't get that true sense of revenge, only further sadness and lost hope. And I certainly think there is a sense of that hopelessness at the end, both from Frankenstein and from the monster. I think that's what Shelley's trying to get across. I think the revenge is used to build and create that sense of loss and hopelessness. And I think really at the end there's nothing left for Frankenstein. All his friends, relatives, loves have been killed, and it's the same for the creation. The creation had one chance, one sort of hope for happiness, and he feels that was in the other female creation that Frankenstein destroys. And at that point, lost hope is there. We know all along that the creation has the ability to learn and feel and adapt to different situations. Yet its physical appearance, as we learned in the last question, its physical appearance is a barrier to any integration into the world. And every time, every approach the monster makes to its a true human sort of existence and a true empathy and belonging with other characters, its physical appearance pushes those people away instantly. There's not even any sense of, oh, I might be able to fit in, or I could fit in. There's never any option for that monster. And there's certainly no hope left at the end. The creation has no hope and goes off in isolation at the end. And we certainly don't really know whether it does kill itself or not, but we certainly know that it will never integrate in society. And I think, as we talked about previously in our character assessment in the first video, the character assessment of the creation, Shelley does build a strong empathy for the creation with that reader constantly throughout the novel. Its ability to understand philosophy, understand religion, understand people's sense of loss, if you say, and that only makes the revenge that it gets on Frankenstein stronger, harder and deeper, because it takes away slowly all the things he loves and makes his pain that much greater. And certainly it is a very well sort of planned and thought out revenge. And yet we don't hate the creation for this because of what it's had to put up with. Its isolation, and the way that it's been treated all along. And certainly if you go back and watch that the first video, Frankenstein, and the major characters, you'll get a sense of that as we go through that creation. The second part of this question says, and why doesn't nature fully create a happy justice in the end of the romantic novel? And I don't think that you find that nature's used as a healing force, but it can't heal all the problems in this, because what Frankenstein has done is he's tried to take the role of nature, he's tried to take the role of creator, and he's tried to usurp that position. And he's gone further than any man sort of has gone before, in the Star Trek sort of analogy there. And that creation, his role of trying to play God and take over from that in that situation, nature can't heal that. It's gone too far. And while he does go into nature and try and work his way back into the world through nature, certainly at no point in time do we get the feeling that nature can truly heal him or fully heal him, because as soon as he's dragged back into the world, we set that angst with the creation. Well, those questions are specifically on Frankenstein, and really that's all we have time in this video for. If you keep watching the website, certainly in the next couple of days there'll be a video put up on questions that link Frankenstein to Blade Runner, given to us through the website and through the video channel. So stay tuned for that one, and we'll be working and looking on a relationship. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for further updates. There's certainly lots of free educational videos for you, and certainly don't forget to visit our website for other resources that will help you do well in your exams. Thank you and good night.